Imagine your house late at night. Everyone is asleep, but somewhere behind the walls a hidden system turns on. Pipes begin to move. Water starts flowing through channels no one ever sees. By morning, the whole house is quietly clean. No one touched a broom. No one lifted a finger. Now shrink that image down, down past the walls, down past the skin, down into the 3 pounds of tissue sitting inside your skull right now. Because tonight, while you sleep, your brain is going to do something almost identical. It's going to flood itself with fluid. It's going to shrink its own cells. It's going to flush out waste that built up while you were awake, and you will never feel a single second of it. For most of modern history, scientists believe the brain simply powered down at night, a machine switching to standby. Lights dimming, nothing much happening. That belief lasted for decades. It shaped how we thought about sleep, about dreams, about rest itself, and it was almost completely wrong. Because in the early 2010s, a research team at the University of Rochester noticed something strange while studying the brains of sleeping mice. Something that shouldn't have been possible under the old theory. The spaces between brain cells were changing size, not randomly, not by accident, on a schedule. When the mice were awake, those spaces stayed tight, compact, almost sealed. But the moment the mice fell into deep sleep, the spaces expanded. Some estimates suggested they grew by as much as 60%. Picture a crowded subway car at rush hour, every seat filled, every inch of standing room taken. Then, suddenly, at midnight, the walls of that subway car push outward. Suddenly, there's room to move, room for something new to flow through. That's roughly what was happening inside a sleeping brain. And once researchers saw the gap, they wanted to know what filled it. The answer was fluid. Clear, watery fluid called cerebrospinal fluid, normally found bathing the outside of the brain and spinal cord. But during sleep, that fluid didn't stay outside. It pushed inward. It surged through the newly opened spaces, flowing between neurons like water rushing into a canal system that had just been unlocked. Scientists gave this system a name, the glymphatic system, part glial for the support cells that make it possible, part lymphatic because it behaves like the body's waste clearance network, the one your muscles and organs already use. Except this version exists only for the brain. And here's the detail that made researchers sit up straight in their chairs. The brain doesn't have a traditional lymphatic system of its own. Every other organ in your body has one. A built-in drainage network, quietly hauling away metabolic waste day and night without you ever thinking about it. The brain seemed to be the exception. For years, that absence puzzled scientists. How could the most metabolically active organ in the human body, the one burning through roughly 20% of your daily energy, not have a dedicated cleanup crew? The answer, it turned out, wasn't that the brain had no system. It was that the brain had a system it could only use part-time, a night shift system, one that stays mostly closed during the day when your neurons are firing, learning, remembering, deciding, and one that swings wide open once you drift into deep sleep. Think about why that timing might matter. If cerebrospinal fluid flooded through your brain tissue while you were awake, while you were trying to think, calculate, respond, react, it could interfere with the very signals your neurons are trying to send. Like trying to run a fire drill while the sprinklers are going off. So evolution seems to have built a compromise. Run the cleaning cycle only when the building is empty, only when there's no meeting in progress, only at night. But what exactly is being cleaned? This is where the story turns from strange biology into something with real stakes for your health. Every hour you're awake, your neurons are working. And working neurons produce byproducts. Molecular debris, leftover proteins, metabolic waste, the exhaust fumes of a brain running at full capacity. One of those byproducts has a name you may have already heard: beta amyloid, a sticky protein fragment that, in healthy amounts, gets cleared away without incident. But when it isn't cleared efficiently, it can begin to clump together, forming plaques. Plaques that researchers have found, again and again, in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease. Now, no single mechanism explains a disease as complex as Alzheimer's. Scientists are still investigating exactly how much of a role clearance failure plays and how it interacts with genetics, aging, and other risk factors. But the correlation is hard to ignore. In several studies, poor sleep quality tracked closely with higher levels of these waste proteins in the brain and spinal fluid, which raises an unsettling question. What if a bad night's sleep isn't just about feeling groggy the next morning? What if it's a night the cleanup crew never showed up? Let that sit for a second. Every night you sleep deeply, your brain may be running a defense operation against the very proteins linked to memory loss decades down the road. And every night that sleep is cut short, interrupted, or shallow, that operation may be running at half capacity. This is the part where the story could easily tip into fear. But fear isn't the point here. Understanding is. Because once you understand a system, you can respect it instead of fighting it. So let's go deeper into how this nightly flood actually works, because the mechanics are stranger than most people realize. Picture your brain cells, called neurons, packed tightly together, like a dense forest. Around them sit other cells, called glial cells, which don't send electrical signals themselves but support, protect, and structure the neurons around them. Certain glial cells, called astrocytes, have long arms that wrap around blood vessels running through the brain. These astrocyte arms are covered in tiny channels, like miniature floodgates called aquaporins. During the day, these floodgates stay mostly shut. But at night, particularly during deep, slow-wave sleep, something changes at the chemical level. A chemical messenger called noradrenaline, which normally keeps the brain alert and vigilant, drops sharply during deep sleep. And as noradrenaline falls, the tightly packed cells around the blood vessels seem to relax. They shrink slightly, just enough to widen the surrounding space, just enough to let fluid pour through. It's a bit like a crowd loosening its grip once the danger has passed. Once noradrenaline drops, the floodgates open, cerebrospinal fluid rushes in from the surface of the brain, flows along the outside of blood vessels, and pushes deep into the tissue. As it flows, it sweeps up metabolic debris, waste proteins, and cellular byproducts, carrying them along like a current dragging leaves downstream. Eventually, this waste-carrying fluid drains out of the brain entirely, exiting through channels that connect to the rest of the body's lymphatic system, where the waste can finally be broken down and removed. It's an elegant system, but it depends entirely on one condition: deep sleep, not just any sleep. Not the kind where you're lying in bed scrolling your phone with your eyes half closed. Not even light sleep, where you drift in and out. Specifically, slow-wave sleep, the deepest non-dreaming stage, where brain activity slows into large, rolling waves. This is the stage where noradrenaline drops low enough, long enough, for the floodgates to fully open, which means the amount of time you spend in deep sleep may matter just as much as the total hours you sleep. You could technically lie in bed for 8 hours and still shortchange this system, if most of that time is spent in lighter stages. That's part of why sleep quality and sleep quantity are not the same conversation. Now here's a pattern interrupt worth sitting with. If this cleaning cycle only runs during deep sleep, what happens to animals that can't afford to fully sleep at all? Consider a bottlenose dolphin. Dolphins have to keep swimming, keep surfacing, keep breathing air, even while resting. They can't afford to lose full consciousness the way humans do. So evolution gave them a workaround: unihemispheric sleep. One half of the dolphin's brain sleeps at a time, while the other half stays alert enough to keep the animal moving and breathing. Researchers studying this phenomenon have wondered whether the glymphatic-style cleaning process might also operate on a similar half-at-a-time basis in these animals. though this remains an active area of investigation. The exact details are still being worked out, but the broader principle is clear. Whatever this brain-cleaning system is, it appears important enough that evolution has bent over backward, again and again, across wildly different species, to make sure some version of it still happens. Now zoom back to humans and to a question you're probably already asking. What happens when this system doesn't get the chance to run? Scientists have studied this in both animals and humans through sleep deprivation experiments. In mice, restricting sleep led to measurable increases in waste protein accumulation in the brain. In humans, several controlled studies found that even a single night of significant sleep deprivation was associated with elevated levels of beta amyloid in brain scans the following day. One night, not a chronic pattern, not years of poor sleep. Just one missed night was enough to show a measurable shift. Now, a single elevated reading doesn't mean irreversible damage. The brain appears to have some capacity to catch up, to clear excess waste once normal sleep resumes. But repeated disruption, night after night, may not offer the same recovery window. Which brings us to a group of people who live this experiment for years at a time. Shift workers, people whose jobs force them to sleep during the day and stay awake through the night, fighting against their own internal clock. Multiple studies tracking long-term shift workers have found associations with higher rates of cognitive difficulties, and in some populations, increased long-term health risks tied to disrupted sleep patterns. Correlation isn't proof of a single cause. Human health is tangled, layered, influenced by dozens of factors at once. But the pattern shows up often enough, across enough different research groups, that it's difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Something about consistently working against your biological night appears to carry a cost. And this is where the story pulls back from disease and risk and returns to something almost beautiful. Because your body didn't build this system as an afterthought, it built an entire rhythm around it. Your internal clock, the circadian rhythm ticking away inside nearly every cell in your body, doesn't just tell you when to feel sleepy. It appears to help orchestrate this exact cleaning cycle, timing the drop in noradrenaline, timing the shift into deep sleep, timing the opening of those microscopic floodgates. It's choreography running silently every single night, whether you think about it or not. Here's a strange thought. Your brain has never once asked your permission to do this. It doesn't wait for you to decide you're ready. It doesn't check whether you have a big presentation tomorrow, or a plane to catch, or a phone buzzing on the nightstand. The moment conditions are right, the moment you slip into deep enough sleep, the cycle begins, automatically, quietly in the dark. There's something almost humbling about that. Your conscious mind, the part of you that feels like it's in charge all day, isn't invited to this process at all. The real housekeeping happens the instant you step out of the room, and maybe that's the most fascinating twist in this entire story. We tend to think of the brain as the seat of control, the place where decisions happen, where willpower lives, where you steer your own life. But some of the most important maintenance your brain ever receives happens in the one state where you have absolutely no control whatsoever. Unconscious, unaware, completely offline. It's almost a paradox. The organ most associated with control depends, every single day, on total surrender. No wonder ancient cultures across the world treated sleep with a kind of reverence, even without knowing any of this biology. They sensed something true, long before anyone could prove it under a microscope. That sleep wasn't empty time. It was working time, just hidden from view. Now, researchers are still mapping the finer details of this system in humans. Much of the clearest evidence so far comes from animal studies, particularly in mice, where researchers can directly observe fluid movement through brain tissue in ways that aren't yet possible in living human brains. Human studies rely more on indirect measures, brain scans, spinal fluid samples, and sleep tracking technology, piecing together a picture from the outside in. Scientists are still investigating exactly how strongly these mouse findings translate to human biology, and how large a role this system plays compared to other factors in brain health. But early human evidence has been consistent enough that major research institutions around the world are now pouring resources into understanding it further. Some are exploring whether certain sleep positions might influence how efficiently fluid drains through the brain. Early research in animals suggested that sleeping on your side, compared to your back or stomach, was associated with somewhat more efficient waste clearance, though researchers caution that human confirmation is still limited, and lifestyle factors vary enormously from person to person. Others are investigating whether specific medications, particularly those that affect noradrenaline levels, might inadvertently help or hinder this nightly process. Certain sedatives, for example, don't simply put you to sleep. They change the chemical environment your brain enters, which may in turn affect whether the floodgates open properly. This has become a genuine question in medicine. Not just, does this drug help you fall asleep, but does this drug allow the deeper, cleaning stages of sleep to happen the way they should? It's a subtle distinction, but it might matter enormously over years of use. Meanwhile, other scientists are looking at aging itself. As people get older, the efficiency of this glymphatic flow appears to decline in some studies, potentially due to stiffening blood vessels, reduced deep sleep duration, or changes in the aquaporin channels themselves. If that decline is real and significant, it could help explain why aging is one of the strongest known risk factors for neurodegenerative disease. Not because aging brains stop trying to clean themselves, but because the plumbing may simply become less efficient over time, exactly when accumulated waste has had the most years to build up. It's a sobering thought, but also an oddly hopeful one. Because if inefficient clearance contributes to risk, then anything that protects or restores deep sleep quality becomes more than just a comfort. It becomes a potential form of long-term brain maintenance. Consider what that reframes. Every earplug you put in to block out noise. Every extra 30 minutes of sleep you protect instead of sacrifice. Every night you resist scrolling until 2 a.m., you're not just avoiding tiredness the next day. You may be protecting the operating conditions this cleaning cycle depends on. There's no need to panic over a single late night. The system appears resilient in the short term, and researchers stress that occasional disruption is a normal part of human life. But the cumulative pattern, night after night, across months and years, seems to be where the real story lives. Let's return for a moment to that image from the very beginning. The house, at night, pipes moving behind the walls, except now you know what those pipes actually represent. Somewhere behind your own eyes, right now, whether or not you're aware of it, your brain is running that identical system tonight. Floodgates that only open in darkness. Fluid that only flows when you disappear from your own thoughts. A current sweeping through the space between your neurons, quietly hauling away the debris of everything you thought, felt, and processed today. It has been running every single night of your life, before you knew what a neuron was, before scientists even suspected it existed. Long before that team in Rochester ever peered through a microscope and noticed the spaces between brain cells breathing in and out like a tide. And it will keep running tonight, and tomorrow night, whether or not you think about it again after this moment. There's something quietly remarkable about that. An entire hidden infrastructure built into the architecture of your own skull, working in total silence, asking nothing from you except one thing. Let go, close your eyes, slip down into that deepest, slowest wave of sleep. And somewhere in that darkness, the floodgates will open once more. The tide will rise, and by morning, without a single memory of it happening, your brain will be a little cleaner than it was the night before.